One thing that I've learned in life is to look at everything in context, a context of time and space. We've all been shaken out of our black swan blindness. What really is a black swan event? One which has three characteristics: rarity, extreme impact, and retrospective predictability. It's important to note in that context that Finance Minister began her speech today by saying that the preparation of this budget was undertaken in an environment like never before. The way we measure and look at risk has changed fundamentally forever now. The post corona world will be a world that would have been shaped by uncertainty, a world where overconfidence will not be fed by the illusory certainty of hindsight. As CEOs reassess the risk they inhabit in a post corona world, there'll be an upside to thinking differently by focusing on the anti knowledge, stuff one does not really know, by not overestimating how much we understand the world and underestimating the role of chance in events. It is no wonder that the pandemic has brought into spotlight how badly we needed to meet the infrastructure demands of this country, and so was the thrust of this budget. Somehow, dishearteningly, a lot has not been done on the startup front. We have a very august panel to really talk about what really have been the implication for startups for this budget. But before I really sort of set the context in motion, for me, 2020 really was the year when technology got into its own. It was the year when there was so much of backlash which was seen for technology in the previous years. We really got into know about the positive side of technology, what it was really meant to help us do things effectively. Look at how technology helped us manage the pandemic effectively. This was the role of technology. In fact, companies, the traditional companies which did not really know about this digital transformation, the term loosely bandied around, had to learn and reassess and relook at the ways they run their businesses. So for startups, those who focused on technology, it was a bull run for them. I was talking to a VC investor a few days back, and he said that Shreya, the normal consensus seems to be that 2020 was the year when startups were ravaged. It's really been a city of two boats where there was some startup which really sort of went through a downhill, but some sectors which really had a bull run. And we might have just added about 100 million internet users in 2020, which really means a boom time or renaissance for the startup ecosystem. With that as a context, I really want to have reactions from this August panel to really try and understand that what this budget had for startups, and is it proper recognition, understanding of what startup really means, the kind of capital startups really mobilize. Are we really playing with the loosely worded definition of startups? At what stage does a company stops being a startup? Even if you raise about 2 billion capital from SoftBank, it's still labeled as a startup. I think we have oodles of experience on this panel here, people who have been strong advocates and been really lobbying with the government to try and understand and get startup its due. To give this government its credit, the first time and in the past 3 or 4 years that we have even been seeing the mention of startups in the budget, which really is the annual financial statement of the country. Let me begin this panel with Saurabh Srivastava. Mr. Srivastava, I want to understand from the initial reactions on what this budget really meant for startups. What would that really be? And then get on to other panelists.
So, Shrija, I think, let me say that overall, I think this is a very good budget. It was in a very difficult time. And there was a lot of fear that there would be a COVID tax and, how would they handle the fiscal deficit. So the one very good thing about the budget is that there's no increase in taxation, corporate, personal, wealth tax, whatever. And there's an attempt to raise resources from good measures that should have been done by many governments many, many years ago. So there's almost like a new disinvestment policy where the government is saying it only wants to have a few companies in just 4 areas. Privatization of banks is revolutionary. Monetization of government assets like, that are idle, like land, whatever. I mean, it's a very good way to raise resources, and privatizing will make these companies more efficient, so there'll be more wealth creation. I think, again, insurance, raising the level to 74% will get a lot of foreign money to come in and take the risks that we would like them to take. So I think there are a lot of positive things, including the reduction from 6 years to 3 years for reopening tax assessments. That's also very revolutionary. So there are, to my mind, many good things, including increased spending on infrastructure, education, healthcare, whatever. Where startups are concerned, there isn't really very much in this budget. I don't think that was the focus. We are having a lot of discussions with government, so they are engaged with us. So my hope is that, and my expectation would be that more measures for startups will come post the budget. But to your question, is there a recognition? Firstly, this is the first government that's given recognition to startups. Before that, it was not a word which was in any government's lexicon. So at least now startups are not invisible. And a lot has been done. I think in some parts of government, there's genuine understanding of what startups can do, but it doesn't pervade all arms of government. And the more important ones being finance, for example. Ashank and I have been through this before. 30 years ago, when we co-founded NASSCOM, we were a $100 million industry. And in government, we had very little hearing. People didn't understand what it could be. And we used to get hit adversely by regulations made for manufacturing. We were collateral damage and nobody understood, right? It was only after a while, with a lot of education, and we realized that it's not that the government officials were perverse, they just didn't understand. So we did a lot of education. Ashank and I and all of our other co-founders and other board members in NASSCOM, we did a lot of education. And then the government understood, and then we got what we wanted. We had 100% tax exemption for an industry that was exporting intangibles. I mean, look at the leap of faith. Black money was easy, right? And they still did it. And it wasn't misused in any significant way. And we got the STPI regime, whatever. So in startups, I think we will need to find a way that there is a carve out for us, like was done for software through the STPI scheme, so that you can, all the regulations that the government has, they're good reasons. They're not going to throw it away just because startups want it. We need a carve out for startups. That's the kind of discussion we're having. And the reality is, Shrija, that what the IT industry did in 30 years, $200 billion, startups can do it in 5 years. So, and it's not just the capital and the money and the foreign investment.
Absolutely.
The fact is that startups are the ones that will solve the big challenges that we have in education, in affordable healthcare, in agricultural productivity, clean energy. It won't really get solved by big companies. It will get solved by startups. So, I mean, startups, what we need, actually, the biggest single thing that has happened in the last 5 years is the startup movement has become what the software movement became at the turn of the century. There is now critical mass. We are we're the third largest in the world. And it's aspirational. I mean, when did media do anything about startups? 10 years ago, right?
That is true, yeah.
Right? So it's aspirational, people want to be. Once you reach that pace, you can't be stopped. So it'll happen. How patient can we be?
Is the question.
That's what we need to see.
Yeah, that was sort of well said, that you mean a special carve out, and perhaps, it is at the stage where software was at the beginning of the century. I come to Mr. Ashank Desai, the chairman of CII, Western Region Subcommittee on Startups and Entrepreneurship, and founder Mastek Limited. With this, I want to understand from you sort of what just Saurabh just said, and sort of adding upon that what really were your initial reactions from the budget? Has enough been done for the startups? And he did mention that perhaps the focus was not necessarily on startups, just given the pandemic brought into light various other sectors like infrastructure and healthcare. But specifically in your discussions with NASSCOM and other stakeholders, what really are you gathering?
So as Saurabh well explained this whole context, of the budget. So many good things are there, and I don't want to re-explain them. One or two more things are like development bank has been formulated. We had lost this whole development bank concept, which has been reintroduced again, and there is a money put in for there. There is this whole issue of 50,000 crores they want to spend on innovation. Technology Innovation Fund is created, and there's an organization, I forget the name, which was launched last year. So they have funded it this year, and over next 5 years they will spend the money. All these things are really good and forward-looking, but somewhere I think government has this problem, as Saurabh also said, we were struggling with. They have not come to grip with what we really are saying or trying to explain them. Although they are convinced about it in terms of overall requirement that startups should grow up and all that. The government is friendly to the industry per se. Government is positive about industry, which is well clear from all the changes that they have made. We just don't understand what is missing that we need to do to convince them that please invest more, please give more to the startups. I have feeling that somehow this collateral damage is hurting us. There is something that they try to seal somewhere. People are misusing or what, I don't know, using startup word. And those examples are given to us once in a while, saying that you guys don't know how people are, misusing this word and trying to get something out of it, etc. So as usual, for 1%, other 99% suffer. So I think government has to get out of that somehow. I feel that we need to put them in the right perspective. I'll give you another example. There is whole issue of this not allowing write-off for the goodwill. Now it is immediately not against startup, one would say, but actually it has impact on startups. Many of us acquire small companies and we have a goodwill because their market price is much higher than us, and we write it off over a period of time. This is a practice followed all over the world. Nothing new about it. In US it is followed and everywhere else. Why would we acquire a company if we don't have a tax advantage? I mean, it is a disadvantage. But the point I'm making is government has to take the whole issue of whole value chain of startup, right from incubation to sell of the company. If they look at the whole spectrum and then identify the discontinuities they have created at every point, I think they will be more clear. What is happening today is we are trying to close some gap somewhere else and trying to open up something else. The net result is not positive at all. So somebody has to look at the whole cycle of the startup.
Yeah, okay. I sort of come to you now, Ritu Verma from Ankur Capital. Ritu, I want to understand from you that the major ask from the startup fraternity, what really remained, unanswered by the finance minister, what would those really be?
So thank you, Shrija. I think a lot of both Saurabh and Ashank have spoken about a lot of the things that the budget has addressed and not addressed. So if I look at the startup community, I think, and I look at the, the environment in which a lot of startups sort of function, I wholly agree with what Saurabh and Ashank said, that, what you need is a carve out to be able to think about how to enable this, because it's going to be, it can be a lever of growth for India in, and technology is a pillar that a lot of other countries have grown on tremendously, and we need to be able to enable that. And I think one of the fundamental things here is that I think we're still, sort of battling this bit here about how do we fit the startup into the existing regime of laws and ecosystems, etc. here. And that is not necessarily, enabling here. So I think step one, we need to take the negatives out of the system that impact startups adversely, right? We spoke about M&A, there's taxation on investment and capital going into startups, which is super critical, right? I mean, we need to be enabling money going into startups and enabling Indians to make money on startups that do well. And for that, there shouldn't be disincentives. We should be on parity, at least, as opposed, there. And I think then the next level comes as to, what is it that you do and what is it that you build around an ecosystem to enable them to actually take off. So, how do you just get, just the ease of what business that they're doing? How do capital flow into this ecosystem much, much more smoothly? And that's very, very critical if you don't want to be going through hiccups and, you want these technologies to kind of take off, not just in India, but from India for the rest of the world. So I think some of those things are still to be addressed. We've made early stages. I mean, yes, hats off to the government. We do recognize startups. There's a lot of initiatives. There's a lot of dialogue, right? Which is, of course, where you start, right? But it's the start of a journey. And there is still, much more to go to actually unlock the opportunity that startups can unlock here. And I think that some of that work is still pending.
Okay. Ninad, I come to you. I think you heard from our three panelists on essentially the opening remarks, just fresh out of the budget. Ninad Karpe is the partner at early stage VC firm 100X VC. Ninad, I want to understand from you that, what really were your initial reactions from a startup perspective? We just heard Madam FM speak a lot about a lot of other things, but not necessarily too much on startups.
Well, I'm hopeful as usual. Optimistic. Prime Minister said there will be a series of mini budgets. And, people like Saurabh and Ashank are actively engaged with the government, advocacy and telling them government is listening all the time. So maybe the focus this time was on infrastructure, rightly so. Startup may not have been 100% focused. So I'm optimistic, they will be heard. We will get a slew of measures. This government, they are doing a lot of things, whether it's, in Niti Aayog, the AIC program, they're investing in a fund of funds. Do we have a list? Of course we do. That's the nature of our job. Any industry would want government to do something. As Saurabh said, can we become as big as IT industry? It is possible. So I'm hopeful it will happen. The recognition of the government is extremely high that startups can become the engine of growth. I fundamentally believe all of what she said today, startups, if they get into that, whether it's the health sector, which she is going to invest a lot of money, whether it's infrastructure building, if startups understand that this is kind of money which is going in that sector, startups can do the same thing in lesser money, far more efficiently. In some years to come, become number one country for startups. We are number 3. It is possible. We have the talent. The number of students and the engineering college and other graduates who are entering startups are just unbelievable, unparalleled. Particularly in the last 12, 15 months, we have dealt with risk and we find it difficult to deal with risk in the corporate sector. Startups have figured out how to deal even with uncertainty, which is what is happening now. So broadly speaking, I believe there will be, this is a big bang announcement meant for big bang economy. Startups were not part of the picture. The picture is yet to come.
Okay. Saurabh, I come to you. I think Ninad is on optimism here. And he's like, I'm extremely optimistic. There'll be a series of mini budgets, what FM alluded to. If you were to give me the series of asks that you have, what you and Ashank so proudly and so well you do, all the panelists have been applauding your work. So what could be the series of asks that you will have with the government, particularly for startups? If you were to give me specifically 5 or 6 of those which you think have been the major misses here, what would those really be?
So the first ask, Shrija, would be for Section 56, where a carve-out has been done. The tax authorities keep using other sections to still go and ask the same questions. So first ask would be, please get the tax authorities to honor the carve-out for Section 56. Okay. I would say, and secondly, if you have to ask questions under other sections, Section 68, what was the source of income of the investors? Now, particularly overseas angels, putting 5 lakhs in a deal and ask and some of them are worth hundreds of millions, being asked for source of income for 5 lakhs, it just drives away investors. So I think the maximum one should ask, if they wish to ask for the PAN number. That's it. The government has all the information. They have all the AI, they have all the tech. Don't ask me for my bank account statements. Nobody's going to give it. So it's a mess. So clean up that section 56, I think. The second ask has been that, look, investment in startups is illiquid, far more riskier, and creates new jobs. And yet, the capital gains regime for that investment is much worse than for liquid public market investment. So I just trade in shares. I have a better tax treatment than if I make these risky investments, which creates more jobs, So the thing is, no country in the world has Section 56, where investments are taxed as income. And incidentally, it doesn't apply to foreigners investing in our startups, only to domestic investments. And secondly, no country has differentiation of capital gains tax between the two. Then you have other stuff like ESOPs. Now, startups need, ESOP is the only currency they have to hire good people, good advisors, good independent directors, but they can't give it to directors, and they don't have the cash. And if they can't get those people, their risk of failure is high. And then if you tax ESOPs at the time of exercise when nobody has any money to pay, and not at time of sale, it doesn't make any sense, right? You have many others. For instance, you have the Section 79 and a version of that Ashank talked about. In startups, M&A is normal activity. Nobody's buying another company to inherit the losses, but the company has losses and you're paying a high value for it. But you can't get a set-off for the losses. It doesn't make sense. There's a Section 281, which says, if I'm an investor in a startup, and if I'm selling shares, most foreign buyers won't buy it because I need a certificate from my assessing officer to say that I don't have any tax liability and none is expected in the next 6 months. Which assessing officer will give me a certificate like that and take a personal risk unless, I settle with him, right? So you have, so these kind of rules, many of them that I would say are come in the way. I think some that we can simplify. RBI processes, foreign investors are very complex and that need simplification. So it's not a money issue. It's really cleaning up the issue. Secondly, we need domestic capital. There's a lot of complaint about Indian startups flipping overseas. They flip because capital is available overseas. 90% of investment comes from foreign capital. Now, for that, we need to get more domestic capital, like other countries. In our case, 80-90% is foreign. If you look at China, it's 50%. In many other countries, it's less. By these fund of funds that they've done and they're doing more of it. That's very helpful. But if you look globally, that most of the money in VC funds comes from pension funds and insurance companies. And in India, those are the two bodies that don't actually put any money in funds. So we need to clean up the rules for that. We need to enable them, maybe mandate them. We have to create more sources for domestic capital. And at a recent event at TIE that we did, Minister Piyush Goyal was talking about corporate India loosening their purse strings. And I think, yes, they should. Many already are. Family offices are getting into startups. But we need to make it easier for them. Because Section 56 applies to them also. And companies don't need money only when, they're small.
Yeah.
Only, raising 10 crores. They need also 50 crores. So if you don't enable that, companies will flip. So I think holistically, somebody needs to see this and see how do we do a carve out, because all these rules that I'm talking about, obviously there's good reason why they are there.
Okay, so there's a long laundry list. So there's a long laundry list to be done by the
collateral damage. So there's at least, if there's hundreds, but I think there's probably 5 or 10. They would solve 80% of the problem.
Okay. Ashank, you want to add to that? I think there's a long laundry list sort of waiting from the industry. And I think to what Ninad also mentioned, that, the demands are endless. But I think to what Saurabh also mentioned, perhaps if we just solve for 6 or 7 key problems, 80% of them would be addressed. I want to understand from all of you, and this is sort of last round of questioning really, is that if you were to sort of define this budget, a tad bit disappointment, it was labeled as a once in a lifetime budget just a few months back, from the quarters of the government. It's a budget which we have never seen, ever. And I think she also alluded to the fact that, we will see a Margaret Thatcher-like privatization drive. Perhaps some steps have been in that direction. And I think we have spent some time in sort of understanding that recognition that this government has done to start up, but it's a long journey. But 3 things which you think should have been done in this budget, which were like the imminent asks. And particularly for me, when I was talking to investors, I think the ESOP, taxation on ESOP was something which was people really thought that will be completely done away with. And treating the unlisted and the listed securities at par has been a long-standing demand from both investors, and the angel investors also in particular, which has not really been done with. These are the immediate asks which were not done. So if you were to give me, all of you, like one key thing with a tad disappointment counts, what would that be?
So the thing to me that would have been the most impactful as far as startups are concerned would have been alignment of capital gains tax between listed and unlisted securities. That would have had a dramatic impact on investments in startups and drawing more capital into it, both domestic and foreign capital. Because eventually, Shrija, we are competing for capital. We are not the only startup nation in the world. So this would have been very helpful. If you restrict it to one, I would say that's my number one.
Okay, Ashank, what would have been your number one?
Yeah, I would agree with Saurabh in terms of capital gains is creating a lot of issues. But I would also request them to send a positive signal about long-term future of startups in Indian government's mind by not doing this 1 year kind of incremental changes. If they had done 5 years, it would have sent a signal that government is serious about it. It may not have a direct impact on them as it is. But what I was looking for as an approach which says that you matter in the economy. Okay, so simple thing they could have done is raise this 1 year thing to 5 years, let's say, or make a statement saying that the rules that are applicable for large companies are not necessarily applicable for startup, or a statement of that kind, which says and strong signal to all the stakeholders in this section, whether it's an incubator, whether it's a VC community, whether it's a foreign agencies who are funding them, and startup themselves, of course, and all of us who directly are involved, would send an energizing message. So I would say one is direct impact, as Saurabh has said. I would also insist on sending that positive message. I would do that one thing.
Okay, so consistency is the key for investors and a long-term vision for startup. Ritu, what would that be for you?
So I think mine is sort of overarching over these things. I think capital is key. And I think we suffer from a perception and a reality as well of these taxation demands, of all of the things that were mentioned earlier. And I'd like to see things moving from an India discount to an India premium, if you like, where globally people are looking at investing in startups, and they don't quite see, they're not deterred by coming in to invest in India, right? So there is the few that have adopted India, but the global capital still perceives India as a destination to invest into startups as tough, with all of these, taxes, just non-clarity also of the long-term support that was just spoken about. So I think I would look to see how do you build that confidence, and how do you build the enabling laws around that, so that capital, both domestic and international, see this as an attractive opportunity to drive the growth here.
Come to now Sanjay Khan Nagra from Khaitan and Company. Sanjay, you have been silent for a while and you have been listening to your other colleagues. But I want to understand from you that if you were to do a regulatory perspective, really, from a taxation point of view, and what you just heard Saurabh also speak on that, I think, help us demystify that, what do these rules really mean from an investor, from a startup M&A perspective? What is the disappointment that you are gathering from, clarity on the listed, unlisted securities? What would those really be?
So it's funny that this listed, unlisted security, the gap between capital gains was quite a bit earlier. And it was this government actually which bridged the gap in some way.
We were hoping by making it worse for
we were
the other way around.
we were hoping for a reduction in unlisted, whereas there was an increase in listed, and that happened a few years back pursuant to similar discussions. Look, I'll tell you, there is no one thing that impacts an M&A. There is no one thing. We talked about a few specific items. There is a list of 100+ items which is doing the circles in the government regime for a few years since Startup India came about, right? There is no one thing that will solve it. And government is not one person. There are multiple departments, multiple people. I think if there is one thing that the government can do, is to appoint somebody within the government whose annual appraisal depends on how good the ecosystem has done in the last 1 year. I think we place far too much importance on budget speech as against what happens between two budgets. Last year, we had a lot of announcements on startups, tech, this, that. This year, we have 5-6 announcements on digital payments, fintech. There is NRI taxation, which by the way, can have an impact on how ESOPs are treated and how M&As are done. Because a lot of startup entrepreneurs become NRIs or they are NRIs. So instead of focusing on various multiple announcements, even if these 5-6 items are done well, it will have a huge impact on startup ecosystem in India. I think somebody in the government needs to coordinate with the tax department, with RBI, with SEBI, with MCA, with various other sector regulators to ensure that year on year, the ease of starting up a company, scaling up a company, raising capital, going IPO, listing abroad, or going M&A route, it is increasingly becoming easier. Like that should be one aim. Howsoever the government does it, my suggestion is appoint that one person or a team who are appraised year on year on that basis. Somebody should do the job that people on this panel have been doing outside of the government, within the government.
Sanjay, for the benefit of our viewers and watchers, can you sort of clarify in very simple language the key recommendations made by Madam FM in this budget for startups, and how does that compare vis-a-vis the previous budget that you alluded to? So, very shortly and simply.
A couple of things that come to my mind. One is the eligibility for taxation relief. So there is a process by which startups in India can get recognized by the government, and within that recognized set of startups, there are very few startups which get exemption from taxation, and that taxation exemption was available to only those startups which commenced their business before March 2021. Now that deadline of commencement of business has been extended to next year. So startups which will commence business during the next 1 year will also be eligible for tax benefit under that regime. The only problem with that is there are very few startups which actually make money to be able to pay tax and therefore claim tax exemption. And therefore it may not be that helpful. Similarly, there was an announcement on one-person company that one person can start a company with and raise a lot more capital as compared to the earlier this thing. There were these 2-3 announcements in this budget as compared to last budget when there were specific announcements on various aspects of startup operations, funding of startups, fund of funds, as some people talked about. Where I am getting at is that even though these announcements have been very far and few in this budget, if implemented well, for instance, there is a fintech hub proposed at Gift City in Gandhinagar. I will be very, very keenly looking forward to what this fintech hub does, because fintech is the next big segment of global startups emanating out of India. And if done right, this one item can do a lot more good for startup ecosystem in India than everything else put together.
Okay.
If I can, Shrija, I just wanted to clarify that actually there is one ministry in the government which is espousing the cause of startups, and that's DPIIT. Yeah. They are working hard. I've been involved in many meetings, so I can tell you that they really want to get it done. But they have to work and convince all the other ministries. So it's not their call alone. So if CBDT doesn't accept what they're proposing, then it's too bad. So they do get it at DPIIT. They are trying, and many of us are involved in some of these meetings, but it's hard. Yeah. And like I was saying, Ashank and I have been through that. We also had a ministry which was the Ministry of Electronics, and they had to go fight with all the other ministries. Our system doesn't make it easy.
Yeah, still fighting.
Okay, my last question to all of you, and I think we have some people on this August panel who have been huge supporters of the startup ecosystem and been lobbying very hard with the government, has really so dedicated their lives to that. And one question to all of you, and maybe I'll start with Sanjay and then get on to Saurabh till the end and get on to the panel. If you were to do a pitch to Madam FM in an elevator, and it's like a very sort of strong, heart-wrenching pitch for startups, what would that really be? And if to really convince Madam on the potential of startups, and perhaps because, we have been in economy, traditional sectors, and then we opened up also IT not many years back, and to expect someone to have a clear understanding of startups is also not correct, just to begin with, because there's so many sectors demanding attention. There's so many people. If you were to sort of cut through the clutter and make that heart-wrenching sort of pitch to Madam on the startups, what would that be? Sanjay, I put you on the hot seat, then get on to Ritu, then to Ninad, and then to Ashank, and then to Saurabh. Yeah.
I don't know. I'd probably tell her that, India has always looked at its corporate system as a promoter-driven corporate system. There is no founder in the mind when you think of corporate regime in India. I would ask her to probably start thinking from two perspectives. There is one promoter and there is a founder. And please pay some attention on the founder who's coming out of college, starting a company, and probably going on to start another one sometime later.
Okay, Ritu?
I would say that, for India to get ahead, traditionally we've thought that manufacturing is the way that countries go ahead and, get to economic development. But if you look around, right, there are now two pillars. There's manufacturing, but there's also technology. And a lot of countries have embraced technology to sort of get ahead. And I don't think India has a choice but to embrace that technology. And in order to do so, startups are critical to be doing the cutting edge stuff that is necessary for us to get the growth that we need.
Ninad.
Yes, thanks. I would say, ma'am, you're looking at $5 trillion economy in 2026. It can become 10 trillion. Have a mini budget, 15th March, only startups. That's it. Simple pitch.
Okay. Ashank.
So, you see what one Mr. Vittal used to say. Vittal, you might not have heard, all young guys. He was the person who helped Saurabh, and I worked with him and others, all of us, to get IT industry some help. So he used to say, what the God gives, the demon takes away. So presently what the DPIT does, the finance ministry takes away. So I would request her to have one department in finance ministry which is only focused on IT, because SEBI is under them, the VC related issues are under them, tax is under them. There has to be some owner in finance ministry who takes ownership is to just promote entrepreneurship. And then they will hopefully coordinate better than this other department which is not in finance ministry to make things happen. So I would request her to have one ownership, call it department, call it person, which is whose only charter is to help entrepreneurship happen in the country.
Saurabh.
I would say to her, madam, look at successful countries like the US and Israel. The market cap of just a handful of startups, Google, Facebook, Apple, I mean, just take a handful, is more than the GDP of most countries in the world. That's what startups do, right? Look at Israel. It's in a hostile neighborhood. It has a population less than the city of Delhi. And all governments around the world, including India, woo them because of what they have. Why? Only startups. So if we want to be the new India, and if we want to learn from our own success, where in 30 years we've gone to zero to global leadership in IT, now we're number 3 in the startup world. Now is a time for us to leverage this. And basically, very much like Ninad said, I don't think we can even imagine the multiplier effect that the startup ecosystem will do. But more than just the money and the market cap is the employment, because a 40-year study done in the US by Kauffman Foundation showed that net new job growth only came from startups in the US. And we need 10 million jobs a year. And that example showed that large companies didn't create that. Government didn't create that. Only startups did it. So I would say that's another big reason for us to trust that startups would do. And the final reason would be that all of the things that we have as challenges, remote education, affordable healthcare remotely delivered, agricultural productivity, clean energy, you look at all of these issues, right? They will only be solved by startups who will see this as an opportunity. And the leveraging of technology and innovation is the only way to solve these problems. There is no other way. So I would say, whichever dimension you look at, madam, there is no better place where you should place your bets.
I'm sure it's with such strong 5 pitches, Madam will be thoroughly convinced, and one can really hope so. And thank you so much to all the panelists for putting your time and energy to this. We had a very meaningful discussion, and I look forward to having some of you again on my panels at V2. Thank you so much, and I wish all the best to all of you. Thank you.
Srija, cover it. If required, Mint kind of newspaper has to cover and give a high weightage and high visibility to it.
Absolutely.
So he reads it.
Absolutely. That's why we're doing this panel discussion. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.